Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our latest stories. From the outside, Isabella had everything: an elegant home, a successful husband, and a life that sparkled in Instagram-perfect stills. But inside, something vital had faded. The laughter between her and Daniel had grown quieter, the touches fewer, the silences longer. She could predict every moment of their day, the way he sipped his coffee, the gentle peck on her cheek before work, the obligatory love you mumbled without eye contact. Their once fiery connection had cooled into something polite, practiced. And yet, no one saw it.
Friends envied her.
Family praised their perfect marriage. But Isabella felt like a ghost in her own life, haunting rooms that no longer held her joy. At night, she would lie beside Daniel, his back turned, wondering if he felt it too, the hollow space growing between them like a fault line. She missed being seen, desired, touched like she mattered. Sometimes she stared at her reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back, poised, controlled, and quietly starving for something more. She wasn't unhappy exactly. But she wasn't alive either. And deep inside her, a restless ache had begun to stir, an ache that wouldn't be silenced by routine or reassured by wedding vows. Something had to change. It began with a glance. Just a fleeting moment at a gallery opening she'd almost skipped, but something about that evening, the music, the low hum of conversation, the sharp scent of wine, had called her out of the dull rhythm of her life. Isabella stood near a painting of a woman alone in a storm, drawn to its raw emotion, when a deep voice beside her said, "She looks like she's waiting for a reason to run." She turned and met the gaze of Alexander. His eyes weren't just blue, they were cutting, perceptive, like he saw straight through the polished exterior she wore like armor. He wasn't like Daniel, with his quiet restraint and rehearsed charm. Alexander exuded control, but there was danger in his ease, a magnetism that unsettled her. They spoke, cautiously at first, art, travel, fleeting philosophies. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. When he smiled, it felt like a challenge. When she laughed, it sounded like something that had been buried and just now remembered how to surface. For the first time in years, Isabella felt like a woman, not a wife. He didn't know her history, her marriage, her expectations. He knew only what she gave him, and she found herself wanting to give more. That night, long after the gallery emptied, she lay awake in bed beside Daniel, haunted not by guilt, but by how alive she had felt under another man's gaze. A glance had shifted something. The question now was, where would it lead? Isabella couldn't stop thinking about that night, the way Alexander had looked at her like she was a mystery worth unraveling. It wasn't just the thrill of being seen. It was the way he made her feel present, like the world around her didn't exist when they spoke. Back in the quiet stillness of her home with Daniel, that feeling faded into shadows. Her husband moved through life in careful patterns, morning news, evening wine, a kiss on the cheek that had lost its fire. She loved him, yes, but love wasn't enough to stifle the ache of invisibility that had taken root inside her. One afternoon, her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. But she knew instantly. Would love to know what else you're waiting to run from.
Heartbreak kaukt.
She stared at the screen, pulse racing. She should have deleted it. She didn't. She replied. And if I told you? That was the beginning of the unraveling. Their messages started innocently, casual, clever, cryptic. Then they turned intimate, layered with longing and the kind of honesty that only comes from knowing someone can't yet hurt you. Alexander didn't ask if she was married. She didn't offer. But he knew. He had to. And still, he called her brilliant, hypnotic, cruel for pretending she didn't feel the same pull. Isabella lived for those messages now, each one a spark in the gray. She'd built her life on safety, but safety no longer satisfied. And in the silence between messages, she realized, she was already slipping. It started as a harmless invitation, just coffee, Alexander had said, his tone casual, almost teasing. Isabella told herself it was innocent. She needed to believe that. She dressed carefully that morning, not too much, not too little, but enough to feel something. Something that reminded her she was still a woman who could be looked at that way. When she arrived at the small downtown cafe, Alexander was already there, seated by the window, sunlight catching in his eyes like it was drawn to him. He stood when he saw her, his smile a quiet promise, a silent dare. They talked like old friends rediscovering one another after years apart. The conversation slipped easily from literature to dreams to the subtle dissatisfaction that neither of them dared name too clearly. But beneath every sentence was an undertone, a tension. His hand brushed hers once when she reached for her cup, and that brief contact sent a ripple through her entire body. She felt breathless, like she was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. As they said goodbye, Alexander leaned in just slightly, his lips close to her ear. "Tell me this doesn't feel like the beginning of something." Isabella couldn't respond, not truthfully. She offered a polite smile, turned away, and walked toward her car, her heels tapping against the pavement like a countdown. The guilt hadn't hit her yet.
Onlyse Exhilaration.
And somewhere, buried beneath it all, the quiet realization, she didn't want it to end. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The days after that coffee meeting blurred into a confusing mix of longing and restraint. Isabella tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, returning to her routines with Daniel, smiling at the right moments, folding laundry while pretending not to replay Alexander's words in her head. But something had shifted. She caught herself staring too long at her reflection, wondering if he'd still find her captivating. Daniel noticed a change too, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening, his eyes full of genuine concern. She shrugged it off with a practiced smile and a soft, "Just tired." But she wasn't tired, she was alive. Awake in a way she hadn't been in years. Every glance at her phone brought a tiny rush of adrenaline, every message from Alexander a spark that lit up the gray spaces of her day. He wasn't overt, not yet, but his words carried weight, slipping beneath her skin like a secret she was growing too fond of. One night, as Daniel lay beside her fast asleep, Isabella lay wide-eyed, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't admit. She reached for her phone in the dark, the screen lighting up her face like a forbidden flame. A message from Alexander waited, "I can't stop thinking about you." She didn't reply right away. But her fingers hovered. Just one answer.
Just one message.
One truth she wasn't ready to say out loud, neither could she. And that terrified her more than anything. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, dinner with friends, laughter over wine, the kind of night that reminded Isabella of the life she had so carefully curated with Daniel. Yet even surrounded by familiar faces and warm conversation, her mind drifted. She felt like an actress playing a part she had memorized too well, the loving wife, the gracious hostess. But beneath the surface, her nerves simmered with something else, anticipation. The buzz in her purse jolted her. She knew who it was without even checking. Alexander. Her fingers itched to read the message, to give in just a little. But Daniel was right there, smiling at her like she was his entire world. And that smile, it both comforted and crushed her. She excused herself, slipping away to the hallway bathroom under the guise of fixing her makeup. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her phone. The message was short. "You looked beautiful tonight. I miss that look in your eyes."
Heartbreak kaukt.
How had he known? How had he seen through her so easily? In the mirror, her reflection stared back with guilt painted beneath her mascara. She hated how much she wanted to reply. Hated the heat that bloomed in her chest at just the thought of him. She typed 3 words, "I miss you." Then deleted them. Back at the table, Daniel reached for her hand. She squeezed it gently, smiled like everything was fine. But inside she was unraveling, thread by thread, thought by thought, and Alexander was pulling at every one. Isabella had told herself it was over. She had deleted the messages, blocked Alexander's number, even tossed away the scarf he once complimented, thinking that removing the physical reminders might help her silence the craving. But desire doesn't live in objects, it lives in the crevices of memory, in the ghost of a touch, in the flicker of a name unspoken but ever present. She tried harder with Daniel. Cooked his favorite meals. Laughed at the jokes she used to love. Let him hold her at night. But every embrace felt like a reenactment. Her body was there, but her soul kept slipping elsewhere. One afternoon, while walking past the cafe where she and Alexander had once shared coffee, her feet stopped on their own. Through the large window she saw him, alone, a book in hand, a cup of espresso untouched. Her heart betrayed her, stuttering in her chest. He hadn't seen her. She could walk away. And yet, she didn't. Something magnetic held her in place, as if time bent around that moment. He looked up. Their eyes met. It was less a look and more a collision. In that instant, the floodgates opened, the nights, the touches, the ache. He stood slowly, not moving toward her, but letting her decide. Isabella didn't go inside. But she didn't walk away either. She stood there for another minute, watching him, watching them, trapped in a reality suspended between the past and the present. And in her silence she knew, some connections don't break.
T born slowly.
Quietly. Eternally. That night, Isabella lay beside Daniel, his arm draped across her waist in a gesture that once brought her comfort. Now it felt foreign, gentle yes but distant. Like a memory dressed in familiarity. Daniel's breath was steady, soft against her shoulder, but her eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling as if the silence could answer the question raging inside her, what have I done? Her body remembered Alexander too vividly. His touch still echoed beneath her skin, like embers refusing to cool. She hated how alive he made her feel, because in that aliveness was guilt, sharp and merciless. But also, desire. Unfiltered, electrifying, and real. When Daniel shifted in his sleep, murmuring her name with affection, Isabella nearly cried. Not because of anything he had done, but because of what she had lost with him. Or maybe what she had taken for granted. She had once loved him with everything in her. But now, love and longing sat on opposite ends of her heart. With Alexander it wasn't safety, it was chaos, intoxicating and dangerous. With Daniel, it was a quiet life. A good life. But was goodness enough? She turned slowly, facing Daniel's sleeping profile, and brushed a kiss to his temple, soft, reverent. An apology he would never understand. Then she pulled the covers tighter, burying the storm inside her beneath layers of comfort. It wasn't over, not yet. But neither was it whole. And in that space between what was and what couldn't be, Isabella slowly began to disappear, from him, from herself. The days that followed were a masterclass in emotional warfare. Isabella moved through her home like a ghost of herself, her laughter still present, her smile still polished, her affection still carefully timed, but inside she was fraying. Every moment with Daniel felt like performance art, a script she had memorized through years of habit, but now delivered without conviction. Meanwhile, the memory of Alexander lingered like a shadow behind every closed door. His messages were sparse but devastating. I still feel you. 6 words that unraveled the seams she'd spent so long stitching back together. Daniel, ever perceptive in his quiet way, began to notice the shifts. Her delayed responses. Her silence when he touched her. The far-off look in her eyes as they shared a bottle of wine, her gaze seeming to reach for something beyond the room, something just out of his grasp. He asked once, "Is something wrong?" And Isabella had smiled too easily, shaking her head, just tired. Tired. It was a truth dressed as a lie. Every night she lay beside Daniel, the guilt crawled under her skin, gnawing at her resolve. But what tormented her more wasn't just the betrayal, it was the craving. The way Alexander had made her feel, seen, consumed, chosen. With Daniel, she had safety. With Alexander, she had madness. And it was the madness that haunted her in the quiet moments, whispering promises her conscience refused to repeat aloud. She hadn't seen him again. But her soul hadn't stopped answering when he called. It was a quiet Sunday morning when everything began to unravel. Isabella stood in the kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, staring blankly at the half-prepared breakfast. The eggs sizzled in the pan, the toast popped from the toaster, but her hands didn't move. Her phone sat face down on the counter, vibrating once, then again. She didn't need to look. She already knew who it was.
Alexander.
He had kept his distance in the flesh, but his presence was relentless. A string of messages, short, precise, and impossibly loaded.
Tell me you don't miss me. Lie to me, Isabella.
Daniel walked in behind her, pressing a kiss to her cheek, his arms wrapping around her waist like nothing had changed. And maybe for him, nothing had. But for her, everything was different. The weight of 2 realities bore down on her, one where she was Daniel's wife, safe and adored, and one where she was Alexander's obsession, desired and undone. She flinched when Daniel's fingers grazed her skin, not out of fear, but because they didn't set her on fire anymore. Later that evening, she found herself outside, pacing in the garden under the amber dusk sky, her phone clutched like a loaded weapon. "I need to see you," the message read. One simple request. One final invitation. Her thumb hovered over the screen, her heart a metronome of panic and longing. If she replied, she would cross a line she could never uncross. But if she didn't, she might forever wonder what it would have felt like to fall completely. Isabella thought she could handle the distance, thought ignoring Alexander's messages would be enough to silence the ache he'd awakened inside her. But silence has a way of amplifying what we most want to forget. Days passed in a blur of routine, Daniel's sweet morning kisses, dinners laced with forced laughter, nights spent lying side by side in a bed that had grown too cold. She told herself she was doing the right thing, preserving the life she'd built. But every time her phone buzzed, she felt that familiar pang, the anticipation, the dread, the desire. Then one rainy afternoon, as she stepped out of a bookstore with a paper bag tucked under her arm, she saw him.
Alexander.
Leaning casually against his sleek black car like he belonged to another world, a world of fire, of risk, of everything her safe, careful life lacked. Their eyes met across the wet pavement, and for a second, Isabella forgot how to breathe. He didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone shattered the delicate calm she had fought to maintain. She should have walked away. But instead, she crossed the street, her heart pounding with every step. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling between anger and want. Alexander's lips curved into that familiar, dangerous smile. "Reminding you who you really are." That night, Isabella lay beside Daniel, unable to sleep. The storm outside echoed the one inside her. She had come so far to stay loyal. But now she realized, the real temptation had never truly left. It was always there, waiting. The weight of her choices clung to Isabella like perfume she couldn't wash off, faint, lingering, ever-present. In the weeks following her second encounter with Alexander, she convinced herself it was over. She had crossed the street, yes, but she hadn't crossed the line. Not again. Still, the guilt gnawed at her. Every kiss Daniel gave her felt like a question she didn't have the courage to answer. Every smile he offered came with a warmth that only made the coldness inside her feel more like betrayal. She was drifting, and Daniel, for all his love and devotion, had no idea he was losing her by the hour. One night, while Daniel slept soundly beside her, Isabella slipped out of bed and wandered into the living room. The city lights spilled through the windows, casting silver shadows on the hardwood floor. She sat down with her journal, something she hadn't touched in months, and began to write, not about Alexander, not directly. But about the fire he had sparked, the questions he had awakened. Was love enough without passion? Was comfort worth the cost of curiosity? As the ink bled across the page, so did her denial. She didn't just miss Alexander's touch. She missed how he made her feel, seen, desired, electric. She thought she could bury the temptation, but the truth was simple and terrifying. A part of her didn't want to. In the quiet stillness of that night, Isabella faced it for the first time. What she wanted and what she had were no longer the same. It all unraveled on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that used to be sacred for Isabella and Daniel. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, sunlight filtered through the curtains, and the quiet hum of routine wrapped around their apartment like a warm blanket. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Isabella sat at the table, staring into her untouched mug, her fingers trembling around the handle. The message from Alexander still burned on her phone. "Do you regret it?" 3 words that echoed louder than any confession. She hadn't responded, but her silence said enough. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. He set his coffee down gently, his eyes searching her face.
"You wie ben Somme wäre Else Lately."
Even when you're here, it feels like you're not. His voice was soft, but the ache behind it was unmistakable. Isabella opened her mouth, but the truth stuck in her throat. How could she tell him that her heart had split itself in two, that one part still beat for him steady and safe, while the other raced wildly in Alexander's presence? I've been restless," she said finally, the understatement of a lifetime. Daniel nodded slowly, but the hurt in his eyes deepened. "Is there someone else?" The question cracked something inside her. Tears welled in her eyes, and for once, she didn't lie. There was. But it's over. Only it wasn't, not really. Not in her heart, not in her mind. And as Daniel sat there, stunned and silent, Isabella realized that sometimes the truth didn't set you free. Sometimes, it only broke you both. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy for emotional disconnect to grow silently between partners. One of the most powerful takeaways from Isabella's story is the importance of honest, vulnerable communication. If you're feeling restless, lonely, or misunderstood in your relationship, speak up, before temptation finds you in the silence. Desire can be fleeting, but trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Nurture your emotional connection regularly, check in with each other, and don't be afraid to express your needs. A strong relationship isn't just built on love, it's sustained by truth, presence, and choosing each other even when it's not easy.